Okay, yeah, thank you, everyone. And really, it was just, and I muted everyone, but you can send comments on the side. Towards the end, I'll respond to the comments. I just mentioned to Rabbi Kelman the other day, I could do this because, as so many others, we are going to Pesach hotels, and I had a few talks I was going to give it to Pesach hotels. So why not give them now to you all? So the title, it's about Kitniyot. Now, there's obviously a lot about Kitniyot. If you read about it, the basic, I guess, trends, of what people have thought about it. I don't want to do that. I want to do something different. But let me first explain what Kitniyot are, because it's a strange custom in terms of customs, because how often do we have something where the Talmud explicitly says it's permissible, and yet our practice is not to eat it. I mean, the Talmud explicitly states that only grains that can become chametz, that is the 5 species, they're known as dagan, that's chametz, and then you can make matzah from them, fulfill the mitzvah of eating matzah. The Talmud tells us that these grains, only these 5 grains, and we know at least what some of them are. We'll get into what maybe there's one that's not so clear a little later. Only they can become chametz. So then how is it that we abstain, that is Ashkenazi, abstain from what we call legumes? There's actually, it doesn't just say it's permissible, there was an opinion in the Gemara, Rav Yochanan ben Nuri, this is Besachim 114b, who says that rice is dagan and could become chametz, but his opinion is rejected. So so now you can understand, I think, why I say it's strange that we don't eat kitniyot. Here is something the Talmud says is permissible, it can't become chametz, and yet we refrain from eating it. We don't say you can't own it. I'll get back to that a little later. So what's going on here? Before we talk about the issues I really want to speak about, where did this custom come from? And there's a number of books if you want to read about kitniyot. Rabbi Kelman mentioned Rabbi Zevin's book, Hamodi B'Halacha, available in English. David Golinkin, by the way, from the Schechter Institute in Israel, has a very nice article. His article, although it's full of scholarship, it also has an agenda, because his whole point is to show that we today, get rid of kitniyot, and the conservative movement did officially, through their Committee on Law and Standards, abolish the prohibition on kitniyot. And there's a number of other very interesting articles. And if you look in the articles, what you'll find is that, and in various books that deal with it, the first source for the prohibition is the 13th century. There's Rabbi Isaac Korbel who wrote this book. It's called, we know it as the Smak, Sefer Mitzvot Katan, because there's also a Smag, Moshe Kutzi, Sefer Mitzvot Gadol. So he seems to be the first source we have for it. At least that's what the sources say. Let me take that back. If you look in the books, they all say that this is the first source. Now, we now know that this is not true, because it's also mentioned by one of the early Hasidei Ashkenaz, Rav Elazar of Worms. And there's another rabbi, not as well known, named Rav Asher of Runel, and they died around 1240 or so. So they're before Isaac of Korbel, who dies in 1280. But I'm going to tell you soon another position on kitniyot, which is hardly known. Now, unlike his predecessors, the Smak of Isaac Korbel goes into some detail about this minhag. He says that people are accustomed, in his area that is, not to eat kitniyot from the days of the early sages, Chachamim Kadmonim. I think this must mean it's 100 years old. So he's writing, let's say 1250. If you're saying Chachamim Kadmonim, you have to assume this is going back to the mid-12th century, 1150. And he also refers to this as a gezerah. A gezerah is not a minhag. A gezerah means a decree. The implication of the word gezerah is that, and this becomes quite controversial later, that the rabbis of the day actually officially banned it. Nevertheless, although he tells us that the prohibition of kitniyot is widespread, he says that his teacher, Rabbi Yechiel of Paris, ate kitniyot. So we see in the mid-13th century, there was no unanimity. Yechiel of Paris is one of the important medieval authorities. He's most famous, incidentally, and for a view he put forward that I have no doubt was not to be taken seriously, although plenty of people have taken it seriously, including Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. He was engaged in a disputation, and he was challenged about negative passages about Jesus in the Talmud. There's references to Jesus in the Talmud, not such a good guy, according to the Talmudic passages. And Rabbi Yechiel Paris said that the Jesus mentioned in the Talmud, about who so many negative things are said, is not the Jesus of Nazareth. It's another troublemaker named Jesus. So Christians shouldn't think that our texts have anything negative against Jesus. It is obvious that this is said just for apologetic reasons, to Pikuach Nefesh even, that he didn't take it seriously, and no one took it seriously. However, I was quite surprised that Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, and not only Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, actually put forth this idea, and they intended seriously, that the Jesus mentioned in the Talmud is not Jesus with regarding Christianity; it's some other person. But so that's how Rav Yechiel of Paris is known. But you now know that he also ate kitnios. Now, the smock is important. Smock, Sefer Mitzvot Katan. There's a number of editions of the Sefer Mitzvot Katan. One of the editions is actually put out. It's a very nice edition by Rav Yosef Ralbag, Rabbi Ralbag Sr., who passed away. He's going to be relevant perhaps later into the kashrus issues, but he has a nice commentary on it, Imre Yehosef. The Smock gives 3 reasons for the abstention from kitnios, all of which he says are designed to prevent confusion. As we're going along, if you have questions, you can type them on the side. I'll get to that at the end of the class. First, he says as follows: kitnios, legumes, beans, all those sorts of things, they're used to make cooked dishes, maisa kadera. And also we know that the dagan, the 5 species are used to make cooked dishes. He says that kitnios are harvested in a way similar to how we harvest dagan. And third, he says people make bread out of kitniyot, or sort of bread products, just like from dagan. Well, since kitniyos are similar to dagan, unlike vegetables, if we allow people to use kitniyos, because remember, you can make cooked dishes that are similar to the dagan, you can make bread, they're harvested similar, people might end up confusing it and start eating from the cooked items. And this follows typical Talmudic reasoning that you're afraid people are going to make a mistake, even though you might say this is far-fetched. It's not any more far-fetched than saying that you're going to take your shofar on Shabbos and you're going to bring it to someone to teach you how to do it, or anything like that. So it's a I don't know how to turn off my little WhatsApp here, so you might see some noises. That's what he says. That's the reason he gives. Then we have another set of reasons. The Tur and Rav Elazar of Worms, who I mentioned it before, they say that since kitnios grows in close proximity to the 5 grains, it's possible that a small amount of these 5 grains might be mixed in with the kitnios. So you harvest the kitnios, and together with it, you have the grains. When you eat rice on Pesach, you might end up eating real wheat. Okay, now what I've just told you is pretty standard. You'll find it in all the sources. Many of you probably know this already. You've heard it, that both those reasons, that kitnios looks like dagan, the stuff that you can make that become chametz, or that it's harvested near. However, in fact, there's a dispute about what we've seen so far. Where did the practice arise? Is it in Germany or is it in France? Professor Chaim Soloveitchik holds that it arose in France, and he's been disputed by Professor Simcha Emanuel, who claims it's in Germany. Not so important for our purposes. However, there's another reason, which is mentioned in Galinkin's article, but it's not mentioned in any other sources. And that is, you can find it. It wasn't known earlier on. It's a later publication. Rabbeinu Manoach. There's a rabbi, Rabbeinu Manoach, in the 13th century, Provence, that's southern France. Today, no one is named Manoach. At least I don't know of anyone called Manoach, but that's his name. Actually, before we go further, I'm getting here that one person can't get in. Okay, they'll figure it out. Hold on. What does Rabbeinu Noach say? He claims, well, the prohibition is completely different. There was an agricultural concept which was advocated by scientists. Maybe we could put scientists in quotation marks, like we put doctors sometimes in quotation marks in medieval times, because some of their cures would sooner kill you. He claims that the basis of the prohibition is an ancient agricultural concept, and there's a lot written on this. And this, as far as I know, is the only source in rabbinic literature that cites this. They believe that there was a type of wheat kernels, and he gives the name to it, that sometimes, depending on how much rain there were, would actually become a legume. So that when you eat a legume, a particular legume, you're actually eating something that's wheat. It looks like a legume, it tastes like a legume, but it's actually wheat. Now at the end, I'll get to the comments, so thank you. It's actually wheat. And he says, lo plug. Therefore, since we can't eat this legume because we might really be eating wheat, therefore we can't eat any legumes. This is a view which does not have any currency later. You don't have any of the Achronim or anyone mention this, but this is an important rishon, and he says that's the reason. Now, obviously, if that's the only reason, we could safely get rid of it because it's clearly false. There's no such thing as any wheat that turn into legumes, depending on how much rain you have. But that's Rabbeinu Manoach. Now, in the I'm getting another person, Rabbi Kelman, telling me that he can't. I'll tell him just go to the website. The Maharil. Do we know the Maharil? Maharil is really the founder, they say, of Minhag Ashkenaz. He also was a chazan, incidentally. If we ever go back to Germany and go, so really is a wonderful, wonderful trip. There's some people on with us now who were there. We talk a lot about the Maharil. He quotes his teacher, Rav Shalom of Austria, saying that Kitniyos, hold on to your seats, is not only a decree of Gezerah, but it's a, I don't know how to turn off the sound, so I'm sorry about those buttons beeping. He says that if you violate it, you're worthy of receiving the death penalty, much like if you were to violate a decree of the Talmudic sages. And he says that if you ignore the decree, you violate the commandment, lo tasur min hadavar asher yagiducha, that it has such an important status. And the Ramosha Isserles, he also mentions abstaining from Kitniyos. So it's standard, I guess you would say. It's significant that the practice is not referred to here as a minhag, but as a gezerah, something that the medieval sages formally forbid. Others speak of the practice as a minhag, and some use the two lashonos interchangeably. For example, the Smak. I mentioned the Smak before. He says it's a Kitniyos is a gezerah, noagin bo isur. Now, noagin bo isur is the language of isur, of minhag. He also says it's a minhag hagun. It's a proper minhag to refrain from it. Now, I don't know if there's any difference practically between gezerah and minhag. If a rishon, if a medieval authority says you can't eat kitniyos, well, that's the status is that of a minhag in the sense. It's not, the rishonim can't give it the status of a derabanan or a rabbinic decree. That is why I think the Smak uses both languages. What he means is that the minhag is to treat kitniyos as if it's forbidden, gezerah. And by the time we get to the Achronim, the more last few hundred years, the only one until contemporary times who speaks against the practice is Rav Yaakov Emden, the famous Rav Yaakov Emden of Altena. And he says his father, the Chacham Tzvi, was also upset with the practice, but neither of them made any moves to abolish Kitniyos. Rav Yaakov Emden said if he has the strength, he says, if I had the strength, I would abolish it, but he doesn't. He also says that Kitniyos creates problems. People don't have enough food. So if they don't have enough food to eat, different variety, what they end up doing is they end up baking a lot of matzah. And this can lead to chametz. Because if you bake a lot of matzah, you're not careful in it, and it can be chametz. Rav Yaakov Emden says the Gedolim should come together, abolish this minhag, and he says, I will join with you, but I can't do it on my own. Okay, we'll come back to some of these things, but let me just deal with some of the halachic issues on the side. What about oils? Today, the big deal is oils, what they call kitniyot derivatives. Now, many people assume this is a new chumrah, a new stringency. It's actually not. In the 15th century, the Trumas Hadeshin, or Israel Israeline, already mentions the custom of not using kitniyos oil to illuminate the lights. We're not talking about eating here. Obviously, you can't eat it, according to him. He says that their practice was not to use kitniyos even to get benefit from it. which today we assume is not an issue at all. Why can't you get benefit from kitniyos? It's only that you can have it in your house. It's just that you can't eat it. But not everyone agreed with the Trumas Hadeshen. It was also pointed out that it has been pointed out that the decree against kitnios does not mention anything about mixtures. So if kitnios are mixed in with other items before Pesach, it should be permissible. We know the halacha is that if chametz is mixed in before Pesach, it's batel, they say, in shishim. On Pesach, it's not batel, it's not batel at all. Even if you have a huge vat and a little bit comes in. Kitnios, the halacha is, you can find this in all the sources, kitnios is actually batel barov, not b'shishim, in the majority. So therefore, if you have a product and it has kitnios in it, and the majority of the product is not kitnios, and it's not like something on the top which you can take out if it's actually mixed, then you're allowed to eat it. This became a big issue in the 19th century and the 20th century, because that's when they started developing kitnios derivatives, oils. Take a kitnios oil. Is that the same thing as kitnios? After all, the sages forbid, the minhag is against kitnios, but is the minhag also against oils? And today these oils are a big deal. Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector. Who was Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Spector? If you went to YU, you should know him because he's the Yeshiva University's rabbinical school is named after him. He is none other than the most important halachic authority in the last part of the 20th century in Europe, the Gadol Hador. You always got to clarify these things. I used to speak about Yitzchak Elchanan Spector, he's the Gadol Hador, but he's the Gadol Hador. He wasn't the Gadol Hador for Jews in Iraq. I mean, they had the Ben Ish Chai, they had other people. So then I used to say that he's the Gadol Hador for the Ashkenazim. Then the problem is, the Hungarians, they had their poskim. They don't need Rav Yitzchak Elchanan. So now I sort of say he's the Gadol Hador in the Litvische world and the wider, I guess, Polish Litvische world. But from people like us who grew up in the Litvische yeshivas, we think of him as the Gadol Hador. It's really not true. It's a very ethnocentric. If you're from the Hungarian Hasidic world, they don't hold of him. And obviously the Sephardic world and the Moroccan world. But okay, he's as great as they come. He wrote a tshuva and said, first of all, he didn't think that kitnios was an absolutely. It's interesting what I'm going to tell you now because he's such a great person, but his position today is not accepted. He says that before Pesach, he doesn't think really there's a problem using kitnios at all, even real kitnios, if you search them and look for them to make sure there's no grains or anything like that. But certainly with kitnios derivatives, he says that anything from the derivatives of like you take corn oil or something like that, it is not forbidden on Pesach because he thought that if you take real kitnios, even the seeds, and let's say you scald them, because if you scald in hot water, you do that with wheat also, it doesn't become chametz. But he thought his big position was that, and I'll come back to this in a second, that oils are absolutely permissible. Corn oil, all the different oils. Rav Kook was involved in a great dispute in the early 20th century when he just came to Jaffa. He was asked about sesame oil. Sesames are without question kitnios. Everyone agrees to that. And he permitted sesame oil. And he said as follows, which as far as I can see is really irrefutable. But just because it's irrefutable doesn't mean that people don't agree with it. He says, what is the definition of chametz? Definition of chametz is if you take one of the dagan and they come into contact with water and then it leavens. You are entirely allowed, according to the Torah or the rabbis, everyone, to take a piece of wheat and just start chewing on the wheat. That's not chametz. Rav Kook says that by definition, kitnios cannot be more stringent than chametz, and therefore, in the case of the sesame oil he was asked about, he said he didn't even get into Rav Yitzchak about whether, oil, whether that's included in any minhag or anything like that. He simply said that we take the sesames and we make the oil. There is no contact whatsoever with water. It just immediately goes into an oil, and therefore, by definition, it can't be kitnios and it can't be forbidden. And this position of Rav Kook is actually followed by students of his in Israel. According to this position, there is no problem taking a corn on the cob and putting it on a stove and cooking it. because you're not boiling it in the water, you're just sticking it on, not the stove, on the grill and making it. That would be permissible. And I don't know how this can be refuted. When you look at the history of Kitniyot, however, you see that over time it became more stringent. Not only has the minhag not been abolished, it's been made more stringent. As far as I know, it's only in the 18th century that the following issue was raised. As I just said about chametz, you can eat wheat. And now the matzah is made out of wheat. If you exposed to water, and 18 minutes is the time we give, then it's chametz. You can eat raw wheat, and matzah is not chametz because it's baked within 18 minutes. So here's my question. Kitniyos are forbidden because they resemble the 5 grains in some way. So we have to treat kitniyos like the 5 grains. What happens if I take kitniyos, beans or something? Can I bake matzah from them? The same way I do with wheat. Make sure within 18 minutes, do everything with 18 minutes. Kitniyos matzah, is that permissible? People are looking at me, we're crazy. How could it be permissible? It's kitniyos. Well, how could it not be permissible? If you treat it the same way you treat the dagan, that is, you make it within 18 minutes. In fact, the Shulchan Aruch Harav of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the first Lubavitcher Rebbe, says explicitly that kitniyos matzah is permissible. The Chaye Adam has no problem at all, and this is in the 19th century. He says that it's permissible to bake kitniyos matzah. Rav Yitzchak Elchanan says, of course, it's permissible. Not only that, he tells us that the practice is widespread. I've never seen kitniyos matzah. Can imagine what they do if you make kitniyos matzah. Rav Yitzchak Elchanan tells you, he's writing in Kovno, that everyone makes kitniyos matzah. How could it not be permissible by definition? But it was a big machokas, with many opposing kitniyos matzahs or matzahs, cakes made from kitniyot, just like how we use matzah meal to make cakes. And the fact is that this became the standard position, I think. So in a certain way, kitniyos is treated more stringently than actual dagan and actual chametz, in the sense that we do not generally, I don't know anyone today who permits making, let's say, kitniyos matzah. So in that sense, it's treated more stringently. Now, why? Why should it be treated stringently? How could anyone oppose what Yitzchak Elchanan said and what the Chai Yodim said, that you can make it? Well, they came up with reasons. They said that since kitniyos doesn't become actual chametz, people would not be as strict with the 18 minutes, because they would assume it's not, and they would end up eating kitniyos. So the reason you can't have kitniyos matzah is precisely because it's not real chametz. People won't take it as seriously. They won't be makpid on the 18 minutes. But the reality at the end of the day is kitniyos is treated more stringent than matzah. Now, why would you want to make matzah or out of kitniyos? Well, there's a couple of reasons I can think of. First of all, some people are very stringent. I don't know if people are aware of this, but there are those who don't eat matzah on Pesach. By which I mean they eat it obviously at the Seder when they have to. And they eat it on Shabbos and we have to make a Suda. But other than that, they will not eat matzah because they're worried that the matzah, in the inside of the matzah, and some of these people only eat hand matzah, that they're worried that it's not done properly and that there could be some chametz there. There have also been times when wheat was expensive, shortage of it, and they wanted to know if they could make maybe matzah, as a staple out of corn. Kitniyot matzah would help in Chabad. Because some Chabadniks, I don't know if anyone's seen this, I've seen this because I was once at a Seder. I was told by Rav Chaim Rapport it's not all Chabadnikim at all. I thought for a while that it was all Chabadnikim. He said only some who are Machmirim. When they eat regular matzah, they're so worried that you could leave crumbs on the table, which then can come into contact with water, and it hadn't been cooked, it hadn't been baked properly, that now it could be chametz. They eat over a bag. And no crumbs fall on the table, the crumbs all fall into the bag, and then they put it away. So people like that, it would be very good. You wouldn't have to eat matzah. We assume you always like to eat matzah. And incidentally, a lot of these problems don't exist with machine matzah. You have some people who want to eat only during the week. They want to eat shmur matzah. They think it's a chumrah. The Briskers always said that this goes back already to Reb Chaim, I believe, certainly Ramosha. Ramosha gave an interview about this in Poland before the war, that on the contrary, that machine matzah is better than hand matzah because hand matzah much easier can become chametz. The Chasam Sofer, incidentally, said that kitniyos matzah is also permissible, although we don't know if he would always have permitted it. Why? He was asked this question in the year of high prices and there was a shortage of food, and he permitted it in that. But he said that you have to make sure people don't think that they can use the kitniyos matzah to fulfill the mitzvah, the seder. But in a regular year, when there wasn't a problem, we don't know if he would have permitted it. And if we had kitniyos matzah, maybe people would be confused. But I don't know if this is a real concern. I mean, you go in the supermarket, you have egg matzah. I don't think anyone assumes you can use egg matzah unless you're older. People don't use that for the Seder. Even for those, though, who were stringent about kitniyot, recognize that it's not a halacha, it's a minhag. And in emergency cases, like if you had a famine, I don't think we've reached the level of emergency yet, but many people have raised it, that you can permit kitniyot in all of its forms. Now, because kitniyot developed slowly over time, and contrary to what the language of Gezerah, there never was an explicit decree. We don't exactly have criteria. What is in and what is out? Are chickpeas kitniyot? As far as I know, the general practice is to regard them as such. Most people assume that the minhag of kitniyot only applies to plants that grow from the ground, not if it comes from a tree. And of course, I think most of us know that Sephardim never accepted the custom of kitniyot, except when they did accept the custom of kitniyot. If there's any people online with us from North Africa, then you know that in North Africa, they do not eat rice, and they continue not eat rice. And those Jews who eat rice, the tradition was that they would actually go through each thing of rice to make sure there was no grain in it there, although I've heard from the name of reliable poskim that today, when you have, what are they, old, those big rice things, when you get in the big package, that they do such a good job in cleaning it out that you wouldn't need to do that. What about New World items? Take peanuts. Peanuts were not known in Europe in medieval times. Are they kitniyos? Well, here we come to a great tshuva, a famous tshuva of Rav Moshe Feinstein. Again, we're talking V'ritzah Chanan, Gadol Hadar, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Gadol Hadar. It's so interesting that these Gadolei Hadar, their opinions have been not accepted, even though I don't know who can reject an opinion of a Gadol Hadar, who's basically our own generation, one generation before. Rav Moshe held that by definition, kitniyos only are those matters that existed in the time when the minhag began in the Rishonim. And therefore, peanuts is a New World item, and therefore, by definition, peanuts are not kitniyos because they were not known when the custom began. The potato was also a New World vegetable, and potatoes are not eaten in medieval Europe. It never became kitniyos. Although that's Rav Moshe's opinion. The Chaya Adam records, Avram Danzig. He records, however, that in Germany people didn't eat potatoes and kitniyos. We're going to see that there's people who have an expansive view of the prohibition or the minhag, and a restrictive view. And potatoes, if you assume it's because it looks like you can cook things just like you cook with the reason we saw. You can cook as you cook maisa kedera, just like dagan, you can do the same thing. You can make all sorts of foods with potatoes. You can make potato bread. That's how we live on. So it makes sense that the minhag would have developed, but it wasn't accepted. Probably because people would starve if they didn't have that. But Rav Moshe held it wasn't accepted quite apart from that, that it never was included in the minhag, and we don't add to it. Now, getting back to peanuts, Rav Moshe says something interesting. The minhag in Lita, by the way, in Lithuania, was to eat peanuts. That was the minhag in Lithuania. And Rav Moshe Feinstein says as follows: if your family minhag is not to eat it, don't eat it. But if you don't have a minhag, by definition, he says, then you are you fall into the category that it's permissible. The default position, Rav Moshe says, unless you have a specific family minhag, is that peanuts are permissible. And Rav Moshe, by the way, also said that soybeans and string beans are not kitniyos. The problem with Rav Moshe's opinion, which I always had, was that corn corn on the cob. That's also a New World vegetable. That's not something we had in Europe. This comes from the New World. And yet corn is accepted as kitnios by everyone. Because I mean, this is a problem I had for years, but recently the Masoras Moshe was published. These are 3 big volumes, collections of Moshe's oral Torah, which he told various rabbis. And in there, in volume 2, page 101, we see that Moshe was asked about the corn. For a while, I thought maybe he didn't know that corn was a New World thing. He was actually asked about it. And he replied that the fact that people don't eat it, and we see they don't eat it, that must mean that the earlier rabbis, when it first came to Europe, they banned it. And the proof that they banned it is that we don't eat it. However, we don't ban anything else. Peanuts were not banned, and therefore peanuts are permissible. Soybeans were never banned. There's no minhag not to eat soybeans. The fact that you have a discussion, should it be kitnios or not, for Moshe means that by definition it's not kitnios, because it was never included. So Moshe's position is, and this becomes vital for one of the new forms of things that we eat today, Moshe does not believe you can expand the list of kitnios today. Incidentally, if you look in the old translations of the Torah, King James Version, for instance, followed by many others, remember what Pharaoh's dream? There's Sheva Shiborim. He dreams, and this is the translation in the old JPS as well, 7 ears of corn. So growing up, when you learn this, you think of corn on the cob that you eat. That's the only thing we know from corn. Now, it's obviously not a correct translation because they didn't have in ancient Egypt corn. Art Scroll translates correctly, ears of grain. What we call corn, the technical term is maize. Okay, well then how did maize become kitnios? Rav Zusha Blech, Zatzal. Rav Zusha Blech, he was a Rav in Muncie. He wrote a very nice book on kashrus. He was a kashrus expert. He actually was the Rav HaMachshir of the hotel I was at for a couple of years in Orlando. And then he passed away, unfortunately. I think it was 2 years ago, right before Pesach, which was very unfortunate. But he wrote an article. You can find it in the OK as a magazine called The Kosher Spirit. And he says as follows. He says that the common name for maize is corn. And he says that while the common name is corn, the origin of the word corn is quite different. In America, we refer to maize as corn. In Scotland, oats are referred to as corn. In Germany, wheat or rye are called corn. And in Yiddish speakers, he tells us, we have some Yiddish speakers on with us, you can confirm this, corn, we say the word corn, it also refers to grain. So he claims that since maize was also called corn, and many chametz varieties of were also called corn, therefore, that was sufficient for the minhag of kitnios to extend because it had the same name as items that in Germany, for instance, corn referred to chametz. I cannot accept that this is the case. I think the reason is, as I said, that you can make bread, you can make cakes with corn. Of course, it's the same issue. You have with potatoes. Why you don't ban potatoes, you ban corn. I think potatoes are much more of a staple. We know how much of a staple they were. It would be very difficult to ban it. One more thing about Rav Moshe, incidentally. I just thought of this, I forgot to mention. Rav Moshe held that you can feed a little child before the age of chinuch, let's say a 3-year-old, you can feed a 3-year-old kitnios, no problem. He did not see it as an issue at all. That is, you could leave the kitnios on the counter there and you could feed it, you could feed it to children below the age of chinuch, because he didn't think that the minhag applied to them. Okay, let me return to the issue of peanuts, because I think it's quite interesting in showing the development of the kitnios prohibition. As I said, peanuts were eaten in Lithuania. Rav Moshe Feinstein says you can eat them. The OU used to give hashgacha to peanut oil. In fact, peanut oil used to be a staple. I want to show you something now. A good book just came out just 2 months ago. Here you can see it. It's by Zev Elef. It's called Authentically Orthodox, a Tradition-Bound Faith in American Life. And look on the front cover here, you have, I don't know if anyone recognizes this. This is Yeshiva University in the 60s was in the, I think early 60s, was in the College Bowl, believe it or not. And this is one of the things he discusses. You know, he's all about modern orthodoxy. And the very first article in the book, it's a great book, Battling Foodways and Folkways, the case of Passover peanut oil, because peanut oil used to be a staple in for American kosher homes. So what happened? I'll show you another picture here, which comes from his book. I knew this as well, but he has a good picture of it. Here's an ad in the rabbinic journal, Hapardes, for planters, high-hat oil, peanut oil on Pesach, under the hashgacha of Rabbi Pardes. Later, the OU put it under hashgacha, and the article of Zeleth is, the book is a collection of articles, is how peanuts went from the staple on Pesach to being non-kosher on Pesach, and what that says about the development of American Orthodoxy. Many people listening right now remember eating peanuts when they were young. So getting back to my question then, how come it all changed? I think, why don't any hashgachas today give hashgacha on things with peanuts? Why doesn't anyone eat it? It's a business decision, basically. The hashgachos want to be acceptable to everyone. Therefore, since there are people who don't eat peanuts, the hashgachos find it easier to avoid the product at all. They don't want to get the reputation of being lenient, which is a kiss of death in today's world. So just don't give hashgacha to these things, because some people eat it, others don't. People can go without it. Now, what this has done, however, is, remember what Moshe said, if you don't have a minhag not to eat peanuts, you can eat them. Today, it's become that we all have the minhag not to eat peanuts, simply because we can't get food anymore at Pesach with hashgacha, so we don't eat it. So I just saw recently the OU, however, is now doing hashgacha on Kitniyot, so maybe they have peanuts there. But the practice today, where people don't eat peanuts, was created because of business decisions, and now that has created a minhag, or a minhag in quotes, because it's not an authentic minhag. In fact, people, if you don't have a family minhag, you might consider, as I mention all the time, the night of the Seder actually handing out, peanuts, not roasted peanuts or anything, just peanuts, whole peanuts, because that would continue the minhag that you don't have the minhag. Now, I gave online, I once mentioned this, I do these talks, Gadol Yisrael, as Rabbi Kelman said, and many others, and I said that there are no hashgacha organizations that give hashgacha to peanuts, and this is an enormous change from what we've seen. And one of the people listening, maybe he'll listen later to this, it's a different time zone, so he can't, is Rabbi Sam Thurgood. He's the rabbi of one of the big shuls in Cape Town. Unfortunately, it's the shul that burned down, if you heard about that earlier the year. And if you know the South African community, the South African community is a Litvisha community. And he wrote to me, and he sent me as follows. He says that, that I have to update what I said, that there's no peanuts because in South Africa, they still go by the old minhag. And look what he sent me. This he sent me, I think it was last year. Here you have peanuts and raisins, and you can see it. Kosher Pesach, B'Hashgachat, baked in Sedek, Cape Town. So if you're living in South Africa, you're still eating peanuts, because that's a Litvisha community. They don't have any Hungarians or anyone Hasidim who came in to change the minhag. And so I find that. So thank you, Rabbi Thurgood. Well, mustard seeds also are kitniyot, even though they're very different than the other things categorized. But the reason they say mustard seeds are no good, because it's similar to beans in that they both grow in pods. Okay, what about quinoa? Quinoa has been like a savior. If you go to the hotels, you eat at home, quinoa's become a staple. Is that kitniyot or not? Quinoa has only really been eaten in America for the last 30 years or so. It was eaten by the Incas, they say, but it was reintroduced recently. So there was no minhag not to eat quinoa. It wasn't even known. According to Ramosha Feinstein's opinion, obviously quinoa, therefore, is kosher. And this is now the view of most of the hashgacha organizations. It actually was the Star K that was the first one to permit it. The OU did not permit quinoa until a few years ago. That's because the OU had two poskim. It had Rabbi Belsky and Rav Shechter. And Rav Shechter held that quinoa was absolutely permissible, but Rav Belsky held it was not permissible because Rav Belsky's didn't hold like Rav Moshe's opinion. Rav Belsky held like the view that we saw in the Rishonim, that if it's similar, if you can make it, do things with it, and cook with it the same way you do with Dagan, then it's Kitniyot. So Rav Belsky held it was forbidden, and despite the fact that Rav Belsky held it was forbidden, I know because I was at different Pesach hotels. The Pesach hotels were under the VODs. All these, I don't know if the OU gives any hashgacha to hotels or anything like that. They're all under local VODs. Now the VODs in America, they're under the local rabbis, and generally when you go out there, these are YU rabbis, and they ask for Rosh Shechter their shilas. And since Rosh Shechter held that quinoa was permissible, so as long as I've been going to these hotels 10 years, we've always had quinoa at them. Although they don't always, I'll just tell you, they don't always listen to Rosh Shechter. I asked, there's a very big rabbi in Florida. He's head of a big VOD. He's a big follower of Rav Shechter. But I sent him an email because last year Rav Shechter came out. Some of you might recall that swordfish are kosher. He holds 100% swordfish are kosher. So I said, so is the VOD now over you? Is the fish restaurants, are they going to allow them to serve swordfish? And they're not, because just because Rav Shechter says it is. But it wasn't just Rav Shechter. It was the Star K, and now it's the OU as well. It used to be that quinoa was only eaten by the gluten intolerant. Now we all eat it. What about canola oil? Canola oil, it comes from something called rapeseed, which from what I can see online is not actually eaten by people. It's only eaten by animals. And there is a machlokas about this. The OU does not approve of canola oil, but the Israeli chief rabbinate, at least it used to approve of it. I don't know if it still does. Okay, let me get back now to Kitniyot's liquid derivatives such as corn syrup. We already saw the Rav Yitzchak Posek Ador, he permitted it. I think actually in the past, most poskim permitted it. Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg permitted it, and others. But today, it's not accepted by the major kashrus organizations. The OU used to give hashgacha on peanut oil. No longer. And Rav Moshe said the same thing that we saw already. Rav Moshe Feinstein said that if you have a minhag not to eat kitniyot derivatives, don't. But barring such a minhag, an affirmative minhag, you can eat corn syrup, you can eat all those things. Now, I want to show you something here. Well, let me pull it up online, and you can see here what I'm holding. I like this very much, but I'll show it to you, a good picture. I'm going to show you a product here. Some of you know this product, Joyva, marshmallow twists. Very tasty. I like to get them during the year. They're under the Chaf K. The whole year, they're under the Chaf K. A couple of weeks before Pesach, you start seeing them in the store, and you see it over there. It says Kosher for Pesach, Rabbi D.I. Sheinkopf. Rabbi Sheinkopf, he lives in, I believe he lives in Delray, or Centuryville, I forget, down in Florida somewhere. He's the son of Rabbi Moshe Don Sheinkopf, who was one of the leading rabbanim in America in the 40s and 50s, rabbi in Springfield, Massachusetts. He's a Chaim Berlin musmach. So what is it? And by the way, there's something very strange. If you go in my supermarket in West Orange, New Jersey, there's a big kosher aisle, and they have all the Pesach foods there, and even the Hamish Hashgachas, Glicks, and all the different Hamish brands that don't have OUs. They have these the little Ungers. They have the Hebrew writing. You have this in that aisle, and people don't realize this, that you're going to see this as corn syrup. This is why the Chaf K doesn't give hashgacha, but the people will come down the aisle, everyone picks it up, and they take it home, and even though the rabbis would not permit it in their communities, lots and lots of people are eating it. Now, what does it say on the back? Let me show you the ingredients. And now you know why, for that the few weeks a year, it's under Rabbi Sheinkopf's hashgacha. Look at the ingredients. Oops. Sugar, corn syrup, chocolate, fish gelatin, artificial flavor. Chocolate contains sugar, cocoa butter, soy lecithin. So soy, actually it's not corn syrup. Yeah, corn syrup is the second one. Soy would also be an issue. Corn syrup. So can you eat it? Well, look what it says on top. This only appears in the Pesach version of the food. Please note, liquefied leguminous extracts, for example, corn syrup, in kosher for Passover foods are fully sanctioned for Ashkenazim and Sephardim alike by preeminent Orthodox halachic authorities, including the renowned Posek Hador, Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Inspector, Zecher Tzadik Livracha. So I don't know of any other products that actually on the box tell you that this is in accordance, even though it says corn syrup, with Rav Yitzchak Elchanan Inspector. I have to tell you something else, that even if you don't follow Rav Yitzchak Elchanan's view and don't think that liquid derivatives are forbidden as kitnios, there still might be room to permit kitnios. Remember I told you kitnios are batel barov? You look in the sources, kitnios are batel in a majority. Corn syrup is not a majority, so therefore corn syrup would be kosher, it would seem. I mean, corn syrup, joiva would be kosher, although joiva is a Jewish company. So that could be an issue of being a different problem. But what about Coke? We all know that now if you go in the supermarkets in our areas, you have the yellow top Coke. Some people, they say, like that more than the regular, and they buy it up, non-Jews. But they say it's because of the corn syrup, and they put in something else. Should that be permissible? Even without, it's batel. I asked Rav Hershel Schachter this question, and he did not want to permit it. I asked him if this should be permissible, because when you learn Yoredeya, there's a principle that products are batel barov, let's say, and or batel b'shishim. Let's say batel b'shishim. The question is, this isn't. It's b'diavad. If you have a product, you can't yourself put in. Let's say you have a product which has a certain amount of kosher food. You can't just put non-kosher food. You can't start putting a lot of kosher food in to make it, or you can't put the non-kosher food in intentionally yourself, so it's batel. But let's say you go to the store, or someone makes a product by mistake or something, and it has a little bit of non-kosher, then you can eat it. There's a big dispute. What happens if the non-Jew makes the food item? Those who've learned Yarden, it's the Beis Yosef on this, a big thing. Let's say the non-Jew makes a food item. Non-Jew just makes a food item, and 90% or 98% of the food item is fine, but he puts in a little bit, for whatever reason he wants, to a little bit of non-kosher. Are you allowed to eat that? I always assumed, and I believe that the standard position is that you are allowed to eat it because it's batel. However, when I asked Rav Schachter didn't want to permit it, and there'll be the same thing with on Pesach. If the company puts it in on its own and it's batel, what's the problem? Well, there's a Rashba. I think the problem, Rav Schachter, I didn't have a chance to speak to him at length because I was supposed to be driving him back to New York. I was going to talk to him and someone else took him. There's a Rashba. The Rashba holds that if the non-Jew puts it in as part of intentionally as part of the product, it's not batel. It only is if it falls in by accident. But if you look in the standard Yoredeya textbooks, they tell you that we don't hold by the Rashba. We hold by the position it doesn't matter why the non-Jew puts it in. Today, however, the kashrus organizations do not rely on that view. They adopt the Rashba's view, except in emergency circumstances, or when they feel they need to. In fact, Rav Schachter was asked a little while ago, are we going to have to rely on bittul, now, because there might not be enough food? Rav Schachter told me in the short conversation, anyone can ask him for clarifying it, he says this is different, because he said they're putting it in, they intend to put it in. So I'm assuming that what he means by that is the view of the Rashba, which is the Hashgacha organization's views today, that if they put it in intentionally, we don't assume it's batel. It's an interesting topic. There's a rabbi in Boston, outside of Boston, named Ari Clapper. He actually wrote an article on this, and Rav Schachter might actually agree with this, that he says that there are sometimes food items are kosher only if they don't have hashgacha. If they have hashgacha, they're not kosher. If they have hashgacha, they are. What's the example he gave? He wanted to argue, and this is what I'm told the kashrus organizations claim, that if the kashrus organization gives it hashgacha, then you can't rely on bittul. So let's say you give hashgacha to a product. When you're giving hashgacha, it has to be at the top level, and therefore you can't give hashgacha to a product knowing they put non-kosher in, because then you can't rely on bittul. But Rabbi Klapper says they didn't give hashgacha, if it was just a product, which happened to be kosher, and they put a little stuff in, then he wants to make the case in that, then you could rely on bittul, because then it's a really b'diavad. However, once the Jew is involved in it, and he claims, and I think this is what the OU holds, by giving hashgacha, you're involved with it, then it's you can't rely. You have to hold the Rashba's view. If you cannot rely on bittul. Other poskim disagree. For example, Nur Abadi says that if you give hashgacha on it, it doesn't change the fact they're making the product that way. They don't care whether you give hashgacha or not. It's still the diavad. But so when I asked Rav Shechter, he did not think that that is permissible. However, I can tell you that other poskim disagree with that. There was a Rav. I'm not saying he's at Rav Shechter's level, but certainly was a reliable Rav. He was the halachic authority for the Chaf K, and his name was Rav Aaron Felder, and he in Philadelphia. Let me show you something here. Yaakov saw this, but here is Rav Aaron Felder with yours truly. He was the halachic authority, the Chaf K. I got to know him because I went to his shul as a scholar in residence, and he died, I think, only age 70. He was the son of a great Torah scholar from Toronto. Many people from Toronto are on with us, from Gedalia Felder. Very open-minded, interesting person. He gave a Shabbos drasha about something I wrote on the Sfarim blog. And the thing is, at this time, though, he basically was blind. He couldn't read. He could see distances. He couldn't see close. People would read things to him. And Shabbos morning, there's a Gemara shir he gave before davening. I tell you something which I saw, I've never seen before. And he's not one of the Gedolim. I mean, he's a Talmud Chacham, but the Kal V'chomer, what I tell you now with the Gedolim, he couldn't see, couldn't read, literally couldn't read. So it was about 5 of us there, and someone was reading the Gemara, and then he says, no, read the Rashi, and the person couldn't find the Rashi, and he starts reading the Rashi Baal Peh. And he didn't have the Gemara. He had a Gemara in front of him, but he couldn't see it. It was just for show. He was able to read, I don't know how long ago it was since he read it, but he read, maybe missed a word or two, I don't know, but he was reading Baal Peh when he could not see, not even from the Gemara, from a Rashi. He must have had a photographic memory or something. And so when people tell you that, these big Rabbanim, they can memorize something, and I saw this with my own eyes, that he was reading it by heart. Okay, so I spent the whole Shabbos with him, and he was a character. He knew all the big Rabbanim and everything. So I asked him the question. I said to him, because he's the posek, he was the halacha authority for the Chaf K. I said to him, so what do you think about the Coke situation? This was actually before I asked Rav Shechter. I asked Rav Shechter after that, and he said, no, we can't. And he said, I'm assuming we're just dealing with corn syrup. I don't really know the secret ingredients. There might be other issues in Coke. There's a whole article about by Adam Mintz. When Coke first went under hashgacha, it's a secret ingredient. Only a few people know it. But to get hashgacha, there was a rabbi in Atlanta named Rabbi Tuvia Geffen. And he gave the hashgacha to it, and he has a tshuva there, and he deals with what to do on Pesach, because there was an issue. In those days, there was a problem with one of the products on Pesach, and he puts in code words for what they're dealing with. And he was Kitniyot, but he didn't rely on bittul either. So he knew the ingredients. And today, the OU, whoever the person is, they have to know the ingredients. They don't know. What I've been told is they don't know the percentages. So they know what's in the secret ingredient, but they don't know how much of each. But I asked Rabbi Felder, I said to him, so assuming it's just corn syrup we're dealing with, or any other product that just has, let's say, Kitniyot, but it's not a majority, like the Joiva. And he told me that the Chaf K could never approve of something like that. He said he thinks it's 100% permissible, because it's Batul Barov. I don't know about Joiva, that's a Jewish company, so it might be different. But whatever, they're Heinz or something, if you see a product of Heinz. He said that the Chaf K would never approve of it because the people wouldn't accept it. He said that if he was asked personally, he would tell people there's no problem eating a product with Kitniyot if it's Batul Barov, but for the Chaf K, they couldn't. And I think this is relevant because many people have said that today in Israel, they're starting to eat Kitniyot. I don't think that's true. Every time people tell me in Israel, Ashkenazim are starting to eat Kitniyot, I ask them what, and what they end up telling me are products that have Kitniyot derivatives in them. or kitnios in a small amount. Well, that's really not kitnios. That's a machokas, and that's many great poskim we saw permit kitnios derivatives. I don't see how you can eat real kitnios as an Ashkenazi in Israel, but it's not so terrible because you have the Rav Yisrael Chanan with the derivatives, and you have the idea that it's batal barov, etc. But as for what Rabbi Felder told me, it reminds me of something I heard a shiur recently from Rav Asher Weiss, and he was also talking about why people became so strict in kitnios, more than you need to be based on the sources. And he quoted Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach once told that he gave a heter. He wanted to give a heter, and the people wouldn't accept it. And Rav Shlomo Zalman joked that this is a kula she'ein hatzibur yachal lamod bo. That we usually the expression usually is it's a chumrah, it's a stringency that the people won't accept. Now we have this concept of a leniency that people won't accept. But so now that I mentioned Israel, what about Israel? Is there still a prohibition on kitnios? The Sephardim are the majority. Sephardim don't hold of kitnios generally, leaving us, although Moroccans are the largest group of Sephardim in Israel. But the practice is supposed to be Rav Yosef Karo's practice, and he didn't hold of kitnios. And they tell me, people in Israel, that I haven't been in Israel for Pesach since 1985, but they tell me that today it's very hard to find products that don't have kitniot, at least derivatives, and the Sephardim are a majority. So can you change your practice? Pretty much all the poskim say no, that if you're an Ashkenazi, you're bound to observe kitnios. The one exception is Rav David Bar Chaim of Machon Shiloh, a very interesting person. If you haven't heard of him, you might be interested in looking him up. He comes from Australia, a big Talmud Chacham, but he believes that now that we've returned to the land of Israel, we have to get rid of all these Golos Minhagim, and we have to become one Jewish people. And he believes that there is no prohibition on kitnios anymore. I wouldn't say that he's one of the Gedolim, but he's a Talmud Chacham, and it's interesting. But he has a whole philosophy of what does it mean return to the land of Israel. I published this book earlier this year. I think you see me as the full screen. It's called Igros Malchei Rabbanan, Letters of Torah Sages. To me, over 30 years. You can, if anyone's interested, you can send me an email. I can send you the link. You can buy it. Someone sells it on eBay. And I wrote letters to many rabbis, and one of the rabbis I wrote to the rabbis, were the children of Rav Avad Yosef, Rav Avram Yosef and Yitzchak Yosef. And my question was simple: can an Ashkenazi living in Israel today become Sephardi and say, I want to be a Sephardi and in everything, the good and the bad, and I want to eat kitnios. And if you look in the book on page 114, he says, Ashkenazi sh'ala al Eretz Yisrael, Rishai v'hitpalel v'fsok kedat maran, HaShulchan Aruch bein lahakel ubein lahachmir. He says that in Chutz La'aretz you can't, but an Ashkenazi who moves to Israel can become a Sephardi. Now remember, he's reflecting his father's opinion. That's why I wrote to them. They don't give their own opinions, Rav Avad Yosef. Everything he says is his father's opinion. The problem was, at the same time I wrote to Rav Avram Yosef, I wrote to his brother, Rav Yitzchak Yosef, who's the current Sephardic chief rabbi in Israel, who also, of course, in any decision he gives, is reflecting his father's opinion, and his father was alive when I wrote these letters. And Rav Yitzchak Yosef says the exact opposite, that an Ashkenazi in Israel cannot change his minhag. So who's right, Rav Yitzchak or Rav Avram? Rav Avram says you can. Rav Yitzchak says you can't. They both think they're reflecting their father's position. It's not the first time the brothers had disputes. There's the bracha on Bamba. Not only did the two brothers, Rav David Yosef and Yitzchak Yosef, dispute on what their father held, their father gave a haskama to each of them. What is it, Shahakol and Mazonos, I think. So I don't know really what Rav Avad Yosef held. I know that there's a dispute among the sons. Sometimes you read Rav Avad Yosef and it seems that he thinks that all Ashkenazim should become Sephardim because the land of Israel is called Atre de Maran. Other times he states explicitly that no, Ashkenazim in the land of Israel are not like Moroccans or Yemenites. They have to keep their own minhagim. What Rav Yitzchak Yosef also says, however, is that a Baal Tshuva in the land of Israel, doesn't matter if he's an Ashkenazi, because his Torah, he never got Torah, never got minhagim from his family. He can become a Sephardi and follow all the Sephardic practices. Now, as for Rav Avad Yosef, it's an interesting story that when he was Rav in Tel Aviv, He becomes Rav in Tel Aviv, I think in 1969, I believe. He changed the language of kashrut certification. Until then, the packaging went something along the lines of this: not kosher for Passover, except for those who eat kitniyot. He changed it to kosher for Passover, except for those who don't eat kitniyos. Kosher la Pesach chutz me'ochel kitniyos. Okay, in conclusion, let me add, and we'll take some questions, another further point. I noted that the only grains that can become chametz are the 5 species. We call them dagan. And if you look in the Mishnah, Menachos, Daf Ayin, it lists these 5 species, 2 of which, there's no question, they're wheat and barley. The other 3 are not so clear. They're called in the Mishnah kusman, shibolet shual, and shifon, although it's usually called shifon, but I think it should be shipon. But what are these? Standard translations, this is how we grew up. We had to memorize these things. Spelt oats and rye. Okay, so anything from spelt oats and rye, you can they can be chametz, you can have matzah, the whole bit. Now, why do we translate shifon as rye? Well, because Rashi gives an old French word that means this. That's why. However, the academic scholars who've investigated this matter state that this can't be true, because rye, that is what we call rye, was never found in the land of Israel in ancient times. So this can't be the correct translation. In fact, Professor Felix, Yehuda Felix, he was the expert on botany and on all these scientific things, that the plants of the land of Israel, all that. He says that shifon is actually spelt, not kusman. And the Aruch says that. The Aruch of Rav Nathan, one of the early, from Rome, early source. It's a dictionary, and it's the earliest of the dictionaries, Aramaic into Hebrew, and it also preserves interesting halachic views as well. Okay, well, if Professor Felix is right that shifon is spelt and not rye, then what's kusman? Because normally we assume that kusman is spelt, and Rashi assumes it's spelt. Then this can't be right if shifon is spelt. Dr. Felix says that it's a form of wheat that was found in ancient Israel called emmer wheat. I don't know if you have any farmers listening to this. Maybe you know what that is. Okay, but then what about shibolet shual? Rashi translates this as oats. But this is problematic because the Gemara says that a key characteristic of these grains is that they could leaven. Rice can't leaven, and neither can oats. So also, Professor Felix says there weren't any oats that we know of in the land of Israel in ancient times. So Felix claims that the shibolet shual is a type of what's called, you can look it up, 2-row barley. It's distinct from seorim, which are called 6-row barley. I don't know all the details of this. This is interesting because there are people who are gluten intolerant and they can eat oats since it has no gluten. So whether oats are one of the grains is important, because if they are one of the 5 grains, then you can eat this oat bread for hamotzi and oat matzah. But how can we permit this? When scientifically, as Dr. Felix shows, and no scientist would disagree with him, shibolet shual is not oats. This is one of those areas where halacha and science seems to clash. And generally, we assume that we go with halacha. At least that's what's been a tradition until then. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach specifically took up Felix's argument and rejects it. And he rejects it because it goes against the Masorah. At least since medieval times, we've assumed that shibolet shual means oats, and therefore it has to mean oats. Rav Auerbach actually states that Felix proved that in the days of Chazal, they did not use horseradish for maror. But he said, we don't listen to him because our tradition is to eat it. So, I don't know how far you can take this, but Rabbi Shlomo Zalman said there's another source. Science is a source, but Masorah trumps science. And it could be that Professor Felix is correct, but this is how we've been eating it, and this is what the Holy Rishonim held. And therefore, this is, we continue with this, and we don't change based on scientific information. It could be that another great Torah sage will come along and say, what do you mean you don't change? Obviously, you have to change. If we're convinced of it, then it can't be oats. And you can't use that for matzah or anything. But Rav Shlomo Zalman felt that scientific information alone without a Masorah is not enough. Just like the Beis Halevi held that scientific information about Techelis is not enough without a Masorah. So much so that one of the rabbis in Israel today, his name is Safran. He's a big posek in the Haredi world. He says that he has absolutely no doubt that the Techelis is the authentic Techelis. Everyone else says, well, we don't know if it's correct, and therefore we're not going to wear it. He says it's absolutely correct. Anyone who looks in the sources will see that they've rediscovered the Tchelas. And then he says, but we still can't wear it because there's been a break in the Masorah, and we don't have the authority to reinstitute Masorah. So it comes down to a very different hashkafic approach. So with this, I come to an end. I hope you found it at least somewhat enlightening. I want to take your questions now and comments. Yeah, Mendel Shafran, exactly. Let me go back and take. So first, thank you all for pointing out that you know people named Manoach. Manoach, it might be one of these new names that have been brought back. After Rabbeinu Manoach, the only Manoach I know, Manoach Hendel, there's a commentary on the Chovos Levavos, but it's not really one of the popular names. Book. Some of you might know this book. It's called Otsar Harabani. It doesn't give you much information, that states and names. It has over 20,189 rabbis. It's an unbelievable work. So I'm going to look up. It goes by the first name because we know last names are very problematic. So before I said what I said, I should have looked it up. And if I look up here under Manoach, and this is all throughout Jewish history. He has a few. He has Manoach Halevi from a few hundred years ago. He has Rabbeinu Manoach, that's the one I mentioned. And then he has Manoach Hendel, the one I mentioned. And then he has one, he calls him Rav Gaon before some. I never heard of him. He's from Georgia. So he has only four here. 1, 2, 3, 4. In all of Jewish history, he only has 4 significant rabbis named Manoach. It wasn't one of the most popular names, but it's nice that it's coming back. A friend of mine asked, "Is there a way to hear by phone?" Well, too late now, but they can go online and they can listen. Chaim Marc, any basis for the opinion had to do with crop rotation of wild wheat plants from prior years coming up with the legumes? Yes, that's it. That's the reason given. Was it the reserve worms, right? That they would, when they would harvest it, they would harvest it together. That's what also the Torah, that the small amount of grains could be mixed in with that. That's an authentic reason. Golinkin, in his article, identifies what he says are 12 separate reasons. I don't think it's not 12 reasons. If you look, some of them are sort of the same reasons, and one of them is not a reason at all. Well, I guess it is a reason, but it's a false reason. He quotes the Besamim Rosh. Besamim Rosh is a forgery, an 18th century forgery by this reformist named Shaul Berlin. Golinkin, unbelievably, and I respect Golinkin. I mean, he has some very good scholarship. He refers to him as one of the Achronim. He's not an Achron. He's a proto-reformer trying to undermine Judaism by forging a work in the name of Rasha ben Yechiel, and it's full of. And one of the reformist responses is against Kitniyot. Look, the Rush might have been against Kitniyot, but he didn't write this responsum. And in this responsum, it says that Kitniyot comes from the Karaites. And obviously, if it comes from the Karaites, we should get rid of it. But so you have to leave that out. But he still has about 9 different reasons they give for Kitniyot. I gave, I think, 6 of them tonight. It seems that many of the Chachmei Ashkenaz were looking ways to make Kitniyot usher from a theoretical perspective. Well, the thing is, they had a tradition that it was forbidden. They had to figure out why it was forbidden. So therefore, everyone is coming up with reasons. They knew it's forbidden. They had the tradition, but they didn't know why it was. So you had different reasons. And the weirdest one, which goes back, as I said, there's a whole article on this by Professor Shemesh in Israel. I think he teaches at the Open University, all about this ancient biological theory that depending on the rainfall, that certain types of wheat could turn into legumes. And that's what Rabbeinu Manoach says. And so he didn't get this from tradition. He's coming up with reasons on his own. The name of the Haggadah that Galinkin edited, it's called I forgot what it's called. The Schechter Haggadah, is that what it's called? I forget the name of it. It's a wonderful historical Haggadah. Anything you ever wanted to know, how people used to recline in ancient times, and and I don't even think there's a problem from an Orthodox perspective in some of the things he might say in there. It's just about the history of the Haggadah. If another great Haggadah is Rabbi Kasher's Haggadah Shlema. That's full of great information. Yes, David Glinken's the main posek for the conservative movement in Israel. And he's more traditional than conservative in America. For example, in Israel, they don't accept the heter in quotes, if you prefer, that you can drive to shul on Shabbos or things like that. And he is a Talmud Chacham. You see the difference, though, between Rabbi Galinkin and the Orthodox posek, for instance, in his response about counting women to a minyan. No slightly difference Rishonim. But for the Orthodox, it's clear the Shulchan Aruch doesn't allow you to count a woman for a minyan. So when he gets to the Shulchan Aruch, okay, well, the Shulchan Aruch, it's not really that dominant authority. The Shulchan Aruch says that, but we can reject the Shulchan Aruch in this matter. But for some of the Tshuvot, you wouldn't know that it's a conservative rabbi writing. He really is a very traditionalist. Alan says, I was at a Lubavitch, and I'm reading it because people are going to listen online later. And first of all, they won't get a chance to see the pictures I showed you. But okay, at least they'll hear everything. So I want to read what people said so they can know. I was at Lubavitch Suda, and when we ate matzah, there was nothing else on the table. And then we cleaned off all the crumbs before eating anything else. Okay, that's the same thing I'm talking about. The only difference is the guy I was with actually had he ate it over a little plastic bag. But it's the exact same thing because they're afraid that it become chametz, and that's the whole issue of gebrachs, which I didn't get into. That you need a whole nother talk for gebrachs. I mean, today people sometimes think gebrachs a chumrah. These hotels advertise, all the chumrah is not gebrachs. Gebrachs not a chumrah. It's a minhag. And it's not the Vilna Gaon ate gebrachs, the Chavetz Chaim ate gebrachs, or Aruch HaShulchan ate gebrachs. It's not, people like to do chumras. If you decide one day you're going to take upon yourself a new chumrah, you want to eat gebrachs, it's not a chumrah. It's being motzi laws on all the gedolim of, that we follow. It's a Hasidic thing, so fine. So it's a Hasidic minhag, but no non-Hasid. That's not a chumrah that you take upon yourself like other chumras. It's going against. It's breaking the minhag, so it's very different than Kitniyot. Moroccans, rice was not a normal part of most North African Jews anyway. Okay, that might be the reason when it came in, it wasn't such a big deal, and they didn't have to eat it. When we were in Greece last summer on the Torah in Motion tour, we were told that also the tradition was that they did not eat rice there. I think this goes back to the Romanio Jews, because the Sephardic Jews in Spain, who were the majority, they certainly ate rice. Corn, maize is New World. Yes, and corn is also not a legume. Yeah, they're not assuming the legume has been expanded here into rapeseed. Is that a legume? They're expanding it into what the end result looks like. It could look like with legumes. And yes, corn. We spoke about that. Cornbread sold in Jewish bakeries, Chaim said, was made with grain. In Europe, you're talking about, right? Coffee is kitniyot, and everyone allows it. It also makes flour. Coffee, also, New World. You can't explain why. The only issue with the New World, really, if you follow Ramosha's position, is corn, maize. Nothing else got in other than that. Peanuts sort of got in, but not according to Ramosha. Everyone holds that corn is kitnios, and Ramosha simply said that the rabbis, for reasons we don't know, must have forbid it, and that's it. So we're stuck with it. I don't think you can get rid of corn now, but corn syrup. See, many poskim held that the minhag was never on derivatives; it was only on the actual item. So even if it's real kitnios, 100%, let's say corn. But the minhag only began, that's where Moshe held, you could eat corn syrup, because there never was a minhag on it. So you're saying that coffee grows on trees, different in grain. Okay, so that would be another reason not to. Okay, so Jeffrey says they dafka do eat peanuts on Pesach to make a point that it's not your minhag. It would have to be, the fresh peanuts because it could be a problem with the roasted peanuts. Uh, and someone emails and texts me here and privately that people in South Africa used to eat peanuts on Pesach. I think that was texted to me before I showed you from the chief, and it's not just the Cape Town, it's the Johannesburg, all the Jews, they eat peanuts there because that's minhag lita. I've subsequently been told that some people said that there were yechidim who did not, in lita also, who did not eat peanuts, but the minhag of lita, if you talk about minhag lita, was to eat peanuts. And Jeffrey says Joyville also has under Rev Sheinkoff sesame candy. Is that from Jeffrey? That's from, I assume it's from derivatives or not? Or is he relying on the hectare of see, Rav Yitzchak Chanan has a hectare also that if you take the Kitniyot and you clean them and you do everything ahead of time, that you can also use them. Rabbi Sheinkoff, since you mentioned Rabbi Sheinkoff, I forgot to say something about him. He wrote a whole book on the subject, which unfortunately I checked on Amazon, is not available now, but it's one of the best on the subject. I have it here. It's called Issues in Jewish Dietary Laws. Gelatin. The first half of the book is gelatin, and the second half of the book is kitniyot and their derivatives. And it's a very nice book explaining the all these issues. He gives the hashgacha. His father gave hashgacha on gelatin. He gives the hashgacha to. It used to be, I think it still is Dannon yogurt. If you look at Dannon yogurt in the supermarket, it'll say on it has a K and it says kosher gelatin. All that means, people don't realize this, all that means is that the mashgiach holds that gelatin's kosher. This is not gelatin from fish, it's not from kosher animals, or anything, it's just that the mashgiach holds that gelatin is kosher. And that's in his book, he discusses this as well. Someone texted me privately that from Ramosha's family, he says that they spoke to Ramosh that when he spoke to his friend, corn is not kitniyot, but they won't eat it because most people don't eat it. Okay, in the Masoras Moshe, Ramosha is quoted as saying that it clearly is accepted not to eat it, and they must have the rabbis must have assered it or said not to eat it. But maybe in a different period that Ramosha held it's not corn. There was a time that Rav Abadi in Lakewood felt that corn was also not kitnios, but that's not the general practice. Okay, I think this is just about the end. Okay, that's just about the end. I want to thank you all. This is not what I normally do. Normally, I deal with the great Torah sages, the Gedolei Yisrael, and historical things. But this was one of the talks I was supposed to give in Florida. And unfortunately, we're not having the Pesach that we're used to. So rather than just hang with me for another year, I'm happy to be able to come and give it. I'm going to give a few others. Also talks, the saving of the Mir Yeshiva, through Sugihara to Shanghai. I'm going to speak on that. And then we're going to do something interesting. We're going to do a virtual tour. Some of you have been able to come with us on our tours, but now we're all stuck inside. We want to be outside. We want to see things. We want to go traveling and we can't. So we're going to take you there. I'm going to take you with pictures and describe. We'll take you to Central Europe, and I'm going to take you to Italy, and I'm going to take you to Morocco. And I'll just show you some of the sites that we saw, talk about some of the great figures there, and at least we can virtually travel and as we wait for this unfortunate situation to end. So with that, I think Rabbi Kelman wants to say something, and then we'll see.
Just to thank you again for the enlightening shiur as always, and yeah.